So, hi and welcome to today's Nutrition and Medical Science BSc Taster session. Thank you very much for joining us. My name is Zoe Lee. I'm a current BSc Nutrition and Medical Science student here at UCL and your chair this afternoon. And we're hoping that this taster section will address those course-specific questions you may have and will help you to gain an insight into what it is really like to study in our Nutrition and Medical Science undergraduate program. So this afternoon, our speaker, Dr. Adrian Slee,
Hello.
will introduce you to some of the great science and medicine that you will learn as a student of Nutrition and Medical Science BSc here at UCL. Dr. Slee would also provide a summary of the Nutrition and Medical Science program, and there will be a Q&A session for the second part of the event. This session is being recorded and will be made available on our website following today's event. We are here to respond to your questions, so please share those throughout using the Q&A function on Zoom. Now to introduce our speaker, we have Dr. Adrian Slee. Dr. Adrian Slee is a registered nutritionist and course director for the BSc in Nutrition and Medical Science at UCL. Dr. Slee teaches coordinate several modules on both undergraduate and MSc program and teaches topic including nutrition throughout the life cycle and body composition. Dr. Adrian Slee also conducts research examining the importance of malnutritioning in aging and how it is relative to frailty. Over to you, Dr. Adrian.
Thanks so much, Zoe. Much appreciated. So thank you very much for coming today, everyone. I'm going to try and share my screen, see if this works. And what I find is wonderful, Zoe. So we did a little test beforehand and it shared absolutely fine. And obviously, as soon as we start, it doesn't work. It
Oh,
just doesn't. Amazing. It's disappeared off the screen completely. So what I'm going to do, let's try this. Give me 1 second, everyone. So thank you very much. You probably I'll just share my entire screen. Let's see if we can get this to work. So here we go. Can you see the screen okay?
yep,
Amazing. So what I would
perfect.
do as well is I will just shut down a few other tabs. Otherwise, what will happen is I'll get some emails or Teams things going. Right. So thank you so much for coming today, everyone. My name is Dr. Adrian Slee. I'm the course director for the Nutrition and Medical Science degree. I came to UCL in 2017. I can't believe it. It's been many years now. Can't believe that. So it's a brand new degree, and it's a great pleasure to come here. Great honour to help set the degree up. My previous background is I actually did a degree in physiology and biochemistry and nutrition many years ago because I was interested in not just nutrition, but many aspects of physiology, exercise, metabolism, endocrinology, all these sorts of things, as well as nutrition. And I will tell you some examples of this actually when we go through the taster session because they're very, very relevant actually. So some of the things I'm going to talk about for a few minutes are actually relevant to also why I chose a degree and also certain things in our current society that are very important, public health issues like obesity, for example. So when I did my degree, I then was very interested in muscle and muscle metabolism. And I did a PhD in nutritional sciences that was very molecular based originally. I was looking at muscle wasting and muscle growth processes. Then I became a teacher, a lecturer. I worked at many different institutions. I set up and helped run many different programs in nutrition, health and exercise science degrees. And then my research that I've developed over some years now, since pretty much, I'd say the stuff that I've been doing specifically on aging nutrition research is about 15, 16 years now. And so all the research that I do now is very, very clinical, practical, human intervention and research type rather than molecular. And the reason for that is that's my interest, is actually trying to help people in the real world. And the other reason why I mention that is to also show about the degree, because we have a degree that's something for everyone. And it means that we study everything from a molecular level. If you can see, I don't know if you can see me or not. So if you can see my hands, it's a tiny little level, it's cellular, molecular level, all the way to whole body and population level, which is fascinating. So today we're going to cover, as a taster session, energy balance and nutritional assessment. So this is like an absolutely critical aspect of being a nutritionist. Okay, you need to understand this. If you become a nutritionist in the real world and you have a clinic, or you become a dietitian, you have patients, being able to understand how many calories someone's consuming, how many calories they might need, for example, the energy it needs, is essential. So doing dietary assessment, for example, is essential. Being able to assess just general nutritional status is essential, right? These are all very practical things that you need to do. And they also link into, when I was talking about that, the beginning reason of why I was interested in going down this whole career myself, is that I found it fascinating. So why is it, for example, that you can have two people, they might eat exactly the same food, but look physically completely different. They have completely different, what we call phenotypes. And so what's interesting is that actually a lot of that relates to our metabolism, genetics, hormones, exercise, all these sorts of things that can have a major influence on our body size, our body composition, our just general metabolic function, and then disease risk. So really essential practical stuff, right? So that's me. I've just mentioned this, and as I say, my research now is very much I'm just trying to get, there we go, let's see if I can get a pointer. Yeah, my research is very much around trying to do stuff that actually helps people, looking at chronic conditions, frailty, cancer cachexia, and chronic kidney disease wasting, for example. But some of the techniques that we learn on the course, these are things you'd actually do in the real world, say in a clinical ward, for example. So I always put this out here as just a couple of questions, just to try and get a bit of audience participation. So we have people probably from all around the world, usually in these calls. We've got a few, I think we've probably got about 12 to 15 people on the call. I can't see the screen in a minute. If you can use the chat, what do you think we mean by the term energy balance? And then Zoe, if you keep an eye out for the chat, that would be appreciated. Anything coming in, Zoe?
And not that I see.
So it's a warm up, right? So you're still warming up. You're still thinking about it, right? So what we're talking about is, when we talk about the concept of energy balance, the classic thing in our society at the moment, huge issue, huge public health issue, is obviously when we talk about obesity. Okay. So the idea that you've probably heard this thousands of times now, at a very simplistic level, and it is highly simplistic, is that, if you're consuming more energy than you need, and say you're consuming a lot more, food intake, high calorie foods, and not exercising, doing the activity, you're going to lay down tissue, right? Energy as tissue, right? Excess energy, right? And some of that's going to be fat mass, right? So this is a really good example when we talk about energy balance. It's a very important concept. Another question: does anyone know how we can measure this? So we talk about energy balance and energy status and nutritional status, because if you're in positive energy balance, so you're basically consuming more energy than you need, and you're going to store some of that, right? You actually store some of it as muscle mass and lean tissue, as well as fat mass. People forget about that, actually. There's some metabolic alterations which occur as well. However, does anyone know how we might be able to assess these things? Any ideas at all? How could we look at this bit and this bit, for example? Any ideas? Anything in the chat, Zoe?
I think we're still a bit shy today.
Still shy, still warming up.
Yeah.
Problem. So we need to first of all assess energy inputs, right?
Oh,
We
we've
do.
got I
Go on.
think I have a delay. Yeah. Um, the chat is disabled. Oh, maybe that's why.
Okay, I
Hannah,
mean, yeah, Hannah, if
is
you're
that
in the
something we
background,
can sort
yeah,
out?
that would be, yeah. We're gonna, so to the students, potential students, we're gonna try and get the chat working for you, right? So we realised it might be disabled, so we're gonna try and figure that out. So the first thing we can try and figure out inputs, right? So dietary intake. So that could be, for example, doing different types of diet diaries, for example. That's one way of trying to estimate how much someone's consuming. Then use some dietary analysis software to estimate, for example, how many grams of carbohydrate, proteins, and fats someone's consuming. Obviously, within that, obviously, we've got micronutrients as well, things like vitamins and minerals, right? But then your outputs, how much you're actually, we use the term, but burning. This obviously it's not a scientific term, but that's in if that's typically what the term that people use. But we think of the term energy expenditure, okay, scientifically, and we measure all this actually in the laboratory for in practical sessions with students, so we can assess the inputs and the outputs. We can also assess just general body size and composition. So, for example, how big is the body, and how much, for example, protein tissues do we have, lean tissues. So, like for example, muscle mass and organs, as well as fat tissue, right? So, and again, we do this. These are really critical, practical aspects of being a nutritionist or a dietitian. Okay, essential learning. So we do this practically and theoretically in our modules on the BSc Nutrition and Medical Science degree. So one fun example, I always the reason there's a pumpkin there is usually we do this. I usually do a taster session around Halloween times. So it's always very relevant. It's always usually a few days around there. So we can, for example, assess how much someone's consuming, do a diet diary, and then you can plug in. We actually use a software called Nutritics. This is just one example of an online program where you could try to estimate how many calories, carbohydrate, and then you got all the obviously for energy, carbohydrate, fats, and proteins, but then other micronutrients and fiber, for example. Now you might have heard of these things before. Those of you who are into and interested in diet in general, you probably know this off by heart, right? So that there's this thing called the Atwater factors. And we actually go into the history and theory behind all of this in our lectures. But essentially, it's actually not precise. It's actually, there's some slight variation, but for carbohydrate in general, it's 4 kilocalories per gram. Same with protein, 9 for fat. It's very dense, very energy dense. And also for alcohol, it's 7 kilocalories per gram. And then in terms of actually assessing this, there's lots of different methodologies. There's pros and cons with different types, and we discussed that in class. So one real good example is the 24-hour diet recall. And so you might interview someone and say, okay, so for the past 24 hours, the day before, what have you consumed, right? And all your foods and your drink that you consumed. But the problems with that, I mean, obviously, there's all sorts of memory issues, bias, all sorts of issues. If someone's unwell, there's lots of factors into play, and it's not going to be a representation of your week, right, or that month actually. And so that's why we use different approaches if you want a robust method for assessing intake. Then for expenditure, okay, I mean, and I've got here, you've probably done like a GCSE A level biology now, so you know what this is. This is the mitochondria, right? So for oxidative metabolism, oxidative respiration within the cell, okay, we use the mitochondria, okay? So what happens is we use oxygen, for example, produce carbon dioxide, and we have metabolism occurring, which means that you can produce ATP. You might have heard of that before as well. And that ATP, again, you probably covered some of this in class, and we do this in great depth in the modules, is the idea is you have this molecule, you break a phosphate bond, you release some energy, and it means you can do work at a cellular level. And that might be to stimulate protein synthesis or protein breakdown, or it could be for muscle contraction, for example, right? Or just for general activity, right? So even at rest, all of your cells are doing things, right? So your liver, your brain, everything is working, right? So you're metabolizing to keep alive. So you have, for example, things like active transport within cells. So all the processes need to keep going. How do we measure this? So the way we measure this, okay, so there's different approaches, okay, and we teach in class different approaches, right? But you can break it down. So the first thing to understand, your total energy expenditure. This is how many calories you expend on a daily basis over 24 hours. But that's broken down into the following. So you've got activity energy expenditure. And the activity can be structured exercise. So you go to the gym for an hour, or it could be just walking, backwards and forwards from school or work or whatever, or going to the shops. Then you've got your resting metabolic rate. That should actually come first, to be honest. And this is your metabolic rate at complete rest. Now, there are different variations. There's something called basal metabolic rate and resting. They're slightly different, but when we talk about that in class, actually, there's slight variation. But the idea is that metabolic rate at rest is very much determined by the amount of lean tissue that you've got, protein-containing tissue. So even if, for example, the issue, say you've got a lot of skeletal muscle, now, if you're contracting muscle and using ATP for muscle contraction, that becomes very important here. But at rest, okay, obviously the more tissue you've got, that's going to play a role, but it's not that active rest. But actually the main organs that play a key role are all of your key organs like the brain, the liver, all your essential organs, kidney, lungs, all your organs that are working 24/7, your heart tissue, the heart is contracting all the time. Okay, so even if you've got an organ that might not weigh a lot, not contribute a lot in terms of size, per unit of tissue, it's actually working really hard to keep you alive, and it's going 24 hours a day. So the thing is, so we can measure all these different things, okay? And the way to do this, and you've probably seen this before as well in your GCSE A levels, right? So this is just basic metabolism. We have here glycolysis, then we have the TCA cycle, Krebs cycle. And if you look carefully, I've tried to highlight, see you've got CO2 there, carbon dioxide, right? So that means if you've got oxidative metabolism inside the mitochondria, where you need oxygen there, you've probably seen this before as well. This is inside the mitochondria to produce ATP via this enzyme ATP synthase. So this is the electron transport chain. For this to occur, and you see you've got the citric acid cycle here, is you need oxygen, right? That's absolutely crucial. So oxidative metabolism. So for glycolysis, you might remember to get this step typically is anaerobic, okay? And you can, if it's completely anaerobic, then you go to make lactate, right? But once you have pyruvate, if oxygen is present, then we go through this cycle and then we produce carbon dioxide. So what that means is there's a direct relationship with the overall energy expenditure and the amount of CO2 you produce and O2 that you consume. So we can measure that, right? The other thing that's fascinating is the fact that actually the ratios, again, you've probably done this in your GCSE A levels or biology, for example, is that for respiration to occur, this is a mole of glucose. You need 6 moles of oxygen to make 6 moles of CO2. That's a 1-to-1 ratio, right? So there's something called the respiratory quotient. So that is CO2 over O2. So the ratio is 1. What's interesting, though, is fat, for example, because the ratio is different. This is palmitic acid example. There's a greater amount of oxygen needed to the amount of CO2 produced. So you get a different ratio. This is about 0.7. So if you look here, what happens is, again, you probably haven't learned this yet. We teach this obviously in the course, is that with fat metabolism, there's a process called beta oxidation. So you're going sideways here. So you're missing this step. So that's the reason why there's a different ratio. But what that means practically is it means that we can measure this, right? So we literally can measure all these different things to assess your overall energy expenditure, and relatively whether you're burning more carbohydrate than fat, which actually is really useful clinically and in other situations, like, for example, with exercise, right? So you can see on the screen here. So, for example, again, if we take fat as a great example, because obviously it's very energy dense, right? So if you look kilojoules per gram, we're talking about, 39 kilojoules per gram using the Atwater conversion factor, like we said, 9 kilocalories per gram, right? Compared to, say, glucose or protein, right? But if you look carefully, there's a couple of interesting things. So the energy release, so kilojoules per litre of oxygen, is actually quite consistent. But the ratio is different between O2 and CO2. So the RQ is different. And that's interesting, because I'll give you one example. What's become really hot topic at the moment is things like low carbohydrate ketogenic diets. So everyone goes on about them on social media. It's a big thing in the news, for potentially trying to, weight loss, diabetes, exercise, all sorts of things. So if you go on a ketogenic diet and you switch after a few weeks, your body switches to burning fat predominantly as fuel. We can measure this. And so typically your RQ levels should drop. Or, for example, if you do high intensity exercise and you start using a lot more glucose, then again, you'd see the RQ rise, actually, or after a meal, actually, just after consuming a high carbohydrate meal. So we do this in class. So some really simple experiments. They're very fun experiments. Zoe, you might be smiling about this, but I can't see the screen, but we have fun experiments in class where we use similar types of techniques. These are Douglas bags. We're literally just collecting air that you've basically been breathing. We do it at rest and also with exercise. Similar setup here with an exercise bike. And so we use this setup with some valves here. And then once you have the air collected, you can then measure basically the amount of oxygen compared to the air in the room. You can actually work out the volume of oxygen inspired and CO2 expired. Then we use an equation and you can estimate kilocalories per minute of energy expenditure. So, for example, you can see, okay, if someone goes from complete rest to, say, light exercise, moderate to intense exercise, their energy expenditure should massively increase. And you do see that. You will see an increase in kilocalories per minute because you've got muscle contraction at a high rate, which you need ATP, right? So you can measure these things. Now, so that's what we do in class practically, and also, this actually costs quite a lot of money. These are the types of kits, about £40,000 each, where again you can use these in the field. It could be so these guys here actually on a river doing rowing. It could be anywhere, actually. You could be doing a marathon run, collecting air. And you see at the back here, it's actually got, it's called a breath-by-breath analysis system. And it would actually connect remotely to a system. So you've got some really cool bits of kit. This is something we actually, so for example, my PhD student, Brittany, she's actually working at UCL Hospital. We're looking at a specific type of cancer patients, CAR T therapy cancer patients. And no one's looked at this before, which is quite interesting. We look at energy expenditure in these patients, and we're using a very similar type of device. We use a clinical grade analyzer with a hood. So someone could be lying in a hospital bed, no physical activity at all, and you can measure their energy expenditure. And that's really important. The reason why is because there are some specific examples, typically in intensive care, where the body goes into like a very hyper stress state. We call it a hypercatabolic, hypermetabolic state. For lots of different reasons, there's a lot of stress hormones flowing around the body. And so what happens is the energy expenditure can be dramatically raised. So even if someone's lying in a bed, they've got very low, minimal physical activity, however, that they've got a very high resting metabolic rate. So going back to here, someone, say in the intensive care unit, their resting metabolic rate might be all the way up here. Even so practically, again, why is that critical? Is because you need to be able to assess how many calories someone needs. If you don't do that accurately, then what happens is that shortfall, if you do it incorrectly, it means that you lose weight. And in the ICU, it's very catabolic. People lose a lot of muscle mass, for example. In the cases of things like severe burns, it can be pretty extreme, actually. And you can have long-term for long, and there are other examples with sepsis. You can have effects with like long-term physical function. Okay. So this is like really crucial, critical stuff. So not only for just the general population, for athletes, but also for clinical populations. And I just said why this is important. There we go. And on that note, going back to that, actually, does the chat work now, out of interest? I'm just going to sip my coffee.
Yeah,
Great stuff. Awesome. Well, we'll wait for the next question then. Thanks, Harry.
no worries. Um, there is a
Go for it.
question. There's two
Yeah,
questions.
yeah.
So, do you think metal ions like lithium could help disease like Alzheimer's disease? It's quite specific.
That is a bit of a random one, and I could not go into this now,
Yeah,
and I would not be. I'd be doing a disservice to my profession to give advice. So, just to everyone here, so I'm a registered nutritionist. I'm not a medical expert professional. I would be doing a disservice actually to the profession to start giving my personal opinions on lithium for Alzheimer's. It's probably a highly controversial topic, and there's probably a lot of very interesting research data out there. Just to say that this is something that maybe, for example, like we have a research methods module in our second year, and this could be an example of a presentation that we'd ask students to research. What is the current evidence on, say, lithium and Alzheimer's disease? But I could never give any guidance on that. So apologies for that. Can't help with that one. Sorry. If you've got please contact your local doctor, GP. There we go. Any other questions?
so why are you interested in malnutrition, frailty, cachexia, sarcopenia in older people?
It's fascinating. I find it interesting that muscle wasting has been for many years in the UK for sure an overlooked topic, and something I'm going to talk about in a minute. And I can do it now. Let's do it now. Let's do it now, right? So when we talk about body composition, so this is the reason why I'm interested, right? So this bit here, okay? So the bit that I'm interested in is the fact that in our current world, we are obsessed with this bit, the obesity range, literally obsessed, right? And I understand why, because of the nature of we live in an obesogenic environment. We have ultra processed foods. We have, all these behavioral factors, social, cultural factors. Everyone's on their phones. People are stressed out, not eating properly, not doing exercise. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I think there's a
But
question relating to that. So, can a
yeah,
person be overweight and still be malnourished?
good stuff. So that links into all this then. So it's all of it. So the issue is that we have an obsession on this. And the problem is, and this is where my research comes in, is that, say, for example, the United Kingdom, we focus everything on the BMI, body mass index. And this doesn't differentiate whether you are 18-year-old or you're 90. It's just on body weight. And that's problematic. Okay. And so, for example, if you're genuinely interested, if you just look at my research, you'll see that I've done a lot of work, for example, care homes, hospitals, specifically on malnutrition in older adults and frailty. And the issue is that in the UK, we use something called the MUST tool for assessing for malnutrition, which just uses basic BMI scaling. The problem you got, as an example, this is a great example, right? So I always show this. So imagine this, you've got 5 different guys, all got exactly the same body weight, right? It's meaningless, really. I hate to say it, but it's true. So when everyone goes on and on about BMI, you go to the doctor about BMI, it only tells part of the story. So if you look carefully, these guys have got different heights, different waist circumference, WC. SM is skeletal muscle. So this person here is technically living with obesity, a BMI of 30. These 2 guys here, 24, technically, show you again, they're completely normal range, normal. This guy is completely different. He's got a much higher waist circumference here and a much lower skeletal muscle mass. The person on the right has a much higher risk of cardiometabolic disease, like diabetes, for example, high blood lipids. Okay, it's not an accurate picture. I'm not a fan of the body mass index. If you're a power athlete with high muscle mass, you could be easily categorized as being obese, and you're not. Okay, there are many examples. There's something, if you're interested genuinely, there's something called the obesity paradox, and they've shown in older populations, in chronic kidney disease and heart failure. So in certain population groups, it's actually more beneficial to have a higher body weight, and you've got lower chances of mortality. So this just tells a tiny bit of the story. And they're actually really great questions because it leads into this thing. And that's the reason why we focus less on this. And we teach students how to measure body composition, because that is only part of the story. So we teach students, we have a second year module called growth and development, and we focus on this. And this is obviously part of my research, but this is something, and Zoe's going to become a dietitian, she's doing dietetic training next year. And these are things I teach dietitians all this, right? This is something we should be doing as routine practice. Just by measuring BMI, body weight, is so misleading. An example of this is, for example, if someone has, we talked about ICU, so it gives some examples. If you have a lot of inflammation in the body, have you heard of the term edema before? So you get a lot of water retention. So what can happen? Example again, you might have someone with a high body weight, but it depends. Maybe they do or not, but it depends on the amount of fluid that you have. For example, if someone's got a lot of inflammation, they might have a lot of fluid, and so and the amount of muscle mass is critical. And I've seen this. I've seen this myself. On hospital wards, I was assessing people some years ago, and in the classic example, you might have someone who's much older and frail with heart failure. They might have a very normal body mass index. So typically on the BMI scale, back to here, they might be classified as normal. But what's really happening is, if you look carefully at their body composition, they have a lot of fluid because they've got heart failure and they've actually got muscle wasting. And so they never get categorized as being malnourished, which is a real shame, because as soon as someone's malnourished, it means that you've got a higher risk of poor clinical outcomes. So that could be disability risk. It could be someone who has greater risk of falls and fractures. It could be just general mortality risk. And then also, for example, if someone's on different treatment or surgery, recovery from different treatments, or it could be chemotherapy and cancer or surgery, can be impaired. So it's important to understand this is super critical, and we teach students how to measure it practically and about some theoretical techniques as well. Some examples in class, we do skin fold caliper assessment methodologies, and using tape methodology, very simple techniques. We do portable bioelectrical impedance assessment, and the the methods that we have that we show people in class, and some students use it for their projects. Some of the techniques that we have are like the best on the market, actually. So in terms of like clinical grade devices that you use in a hospital ward, and these are very portable. And I've used these devices actually portable, taken them to care homes, assessing care home residents. And you just use a very harmless current. It's a very harmless, easy technique. The only issue is if you have a cardiac pacemaker, you can't do it. It's a contraindication. But other than that, it's a really useful technique that you can use if you do it properly, that is. And we also teach students as well the pros and cons of other techniques. So typically in clinical practice, they don't use this in routinely, say in the NHS in the UK, but you could do things like DEXA scans for, you got bone mineral density in blue there, but you can see you got the red is the lean soft tissue, you got the organs and the muscle, and then around the outside in yellow is the fat tissue. Sometimes routinely, so say in cancer, if someone's trying to look for metastasis or in liver disease, they might take a cross-sectional, they do a scan using, say, computed tomography, for example. So you might have scanning techniques, but typically looking for body composition, it's only recently in some countries that are starting to do it routinely. So that is the future, right? And this is what my research is all about, is trying to figure out what's happening to someone there, and then the risk of conditions, right? So this is the stuff that I find fascinating, and most students by the end find it fascinating. Zoe, did you find it fascinating?
Yeah, I really enjoyed the course.
Good to hear. And Zoe's finishing very soon as well, so she can tell you about that at the end. And she's going on to study dietetics. So talking about the course, and I've realized I always do this. I talk too much for too long, so apologies. It's for the next 10 minutes. I'll talk about the course. So as I say, we're running now. So I came in 2017. That's when we actually set the course up. And so we're now in the 6th year of graduates. Okay. It's a really cool course. It's accredited with the Association of Nutrition. And I say it's cool because there's no other course like it as far as I'm aware in the UK for sure. Mate, I've no idea about around the rest of the world, but the thing with it is that not only, so we're closely aligned with the applied medical sciences degree, and in the first year we have very, very similar line modules, a lot of group teaching on just physiology and pathophysiology, and that sets the scene. It means that you've got all your very good, very in depth. I was going to say, we're going to very depth and high depth actually on understanding how the body systems work. And then in the second year, you do a nutrition module as well, but in the second and third year, that's when we go into a lot of breadth and depth and some very novel and interesting areas. So we cover pretty much everything. I don't know of a course that has these same types of modules actually, and the way it's been developed, which is good. This is an example of some of the modules that we have. And you can see, because malnutrition and obesity is such a huge issue in our society, is we have a double module that goes across both term 1 and term 2, actually. We cover a lot of metabolism, growth and development. We cover everything through the life cycle. And that's where you learn about body composition in particular as well. And then we have some interesting optional modules. We do research methods to basically teach you guys how to do research, how to conduct research. We have a statistical methods module that also helps you for understanding how research is conducted from a more data analysis perspective. But then we have some really fascinating optional modules. Now, because the course is affiliated with the AFN, Association of Nutrition, then everything's very tightly, closely linked. So you only get one optional module. But we have a nutrition and cancer risk module, and there's loads of applied medical science related choices and options related to pharmacology, applied genomics. There's a circadian rhythms module, a nervous system module. There's even a sensational senses module. So there really is something for everyone. And then in year 3, this is where we go really, really specialized, which is really great. So the applied nutrition module is a real clinical nutrition more dietetics focused type of module. We remember, this isn't dietetics. We don't do placements. You won't become a dietitian at the end of this course, but we set you up to then study a master's degree in dietetics, right? And I'll talk a little bit more about this in the next slide. Then we do sports nutrition as well. We have something for everyone. So if you're interested in the social and psychological aspects of nutrition, which is really crucial, because of obviously understanding, why do we consume the food that we do and the way that we do, especially now because of the advent, of social media and everything else. There's lots of factors in the way food companies work, and and also legislation and laws. There's lots of things that impact on why we eat the way we do. So we have this module and the public health module as well. We have frailty and aging, which is I'm the module leader for. Again, it's my specialism. And again, I at BSc undergraduate level, I'm not aware of any course that has this type of mixture of interesting modules. And then we've again another nice range of fascinating optional modules. Microbiome, again, really big at the moment. Pretty much every day I see several articles on the microbiome on my newsfeed. Huge topic, and it's something for everyone. Every year we have one or two students who are interested more in actual business, actually, and working maybe for a biotech type company or a nutrition company, or even a drug company. And so this is actually quite a nice module run by the applied medical science team. There's also more of a psychological, neurological type module where mind meets brain. And then we have a nutrition and cancer treatment module. The thing to understand, and this is really important, gets to the next slide, is so genuinely, and this is always the fun bit, because when I do lots of open days, and I can tell you from my experience, because I've worked at multiple institutions, is we are genuinely 100% a world leader, right? So that's the reason why we're in the top 10, okay, in the world. Is we're a very research intensive university. We show this in our course, right? And so in other places I used to work at, it might be I have a module and I might have to teach a lot of that course. We are really, really lucky that we're very closely affiliated with, for example, the Institute of Child Health, UCL Hospital, Royal Free Hospital. So we have eminent clinicians, dietitians, researchers in the field who come and give guest lectures at undergraduate level, which is not really well known, actually. It's usually at a master's degree level. So we're really lucky. An example, going back to growth and development here, we literally have several professors who teach on the module. People have written textbooks on infant feeding. So global experts on developmental origins of adult disease hypothesis, on infant feeding, for example. Another example is Professor Tim Cole. Okay, so he's a medical statistician who helped develop the growth charts. So if any of you have been to your doctor's surgery when you're growing up with your mum and dad, and they point to the wall and you see a chart of your growth, what's your body weight, your height, what age range, and you see these lines, these centiles. Professor Tim Cole helped develop that with the World Health Organization. So we're really lucky. And the same with the applied nutrition module. Literally, we cover pretty much most of the main body systems and disease conditions, and taught by dietitians at UCL Hospital, for example, Royal Free Hospital, and medical doctors. And the other beautiful thing about that is it means you meet local dietitians. You might be able to get some shadowing experience, try and figure out if you want to become a dietitian or not. So it's a really, really great module. Nutrition and cancer treatment module, again, a super novel module. I co-lead that with someone, Professor Surentharan, over in the Institute of Cancer. So again, if you're aware of this, so UCL Cancer Division is really well known. And again, we have just around the corner from where we work, if any of you know London, we have the Division of Medicine, which is just around the corner from Macmillan Cancer Centre. And we're very, very lucky. We have, again, like experts, like clinicians, medical doctors, dietitians who come and teach on that module. And much of my research is affiliated with that. So, for example, malnutrition, muscle wasting, sarcopenia in cancer. So it's very interesting, fascinating. So we're really lucky to have. So we
Time
genuinely,
reminder, we have about
yes,
14 minutes left.
thank you
30.
so much, Zoe. Appreciated. So genuinely, it is a research-led course and really interesting. So we literally cover the most current scientific topics. In terms of assessment strategy, students always like asking this question. I would say, and obviously I've been the course director for several years now, and for me, the most critical thing is transferable skills. So we can assess you, we can use all different types of exam types, right? The most important thing for me, seeing this year after year, is the evolution of students and being able to present in a confident, logical manner. And so it means that they can step out, go for a job interview at the end of the course, go for, say, a dietetics interview or PhD interview and do really well. Being able to present is a really important skill. So we do lots of different types of presentations with different mediums as well. So your standard PowerPoint presentation, we do video projects and video presentations, poster presentations, all sorts of variations, both individual and group. We also have some novel types of assessments with different types of open book exam, case studies, practical reports, a whole range of different, including even business case studies. So you need these in the real world. You need these things. So, for example, if you work in public health nutrition in the future, and you're working for a government, you need to be able to do these things. If you work as a dietitian, you need to be able to assess case studies, for example, right? So these are all really practical things. As well as, don't forget the dissertation. I've nearly forgot that. So again, we're super lucky that we can provide a whole range of types of dissertations on novel research areas. And Zoe can talk, if you get time, we can talk about your dissertation. So on novel research, right? Again, pretty much unheard of at BSc level for many universities. And we offer projects, not only your standard literature review type projects and systematic reviews, but actually recruiting participants. I've got some studies where I recruit athletes, measure body composition, nutrients, dietary intake. It can be hormones as well. Data analysis projects. So Zoe did a data analysis project from a clinical audit from a hospital department. Loads of different types of projects are available, as well as your standard lab-based project. If you're interested in a biochemistry type project, that's available too. I said we're affiliated with the AFN, so our course accredited. I won't say much except this is crucial. If you want to become a nutritionist in the future, you want a job in nutrition, it's really essential that you have accreditation. And the easiest way to do it is to choose a course that is fully accredited.
So we might want to move on to Q&A as soon as
So
possible.
to finish off, I would say as well, we have so really strong suite of MSc programs, and our course, because it's nutritional medical science, has been very much developed in mind. So we're not a food science course, we're very much developed in mind to then do further study. So for example, we have 4 MSc programs now at UCL, including dietetics. So if you wanted to say work in a hospital as a dietitian, but we have obesity and clinical nutrition, another new course. We have eating disorders, clinical nutrition, a really specialised course run by psychiatrists. So eating disorders is a very specialised psychological condition. So again, really fascinating stuff, as well as clinical public health nutrition. It's been running for many years now. So there we go. How's that? And shall I stop? Is there any questions about the slides? Otherwise, I'll stop sharing. Any questions about course or slides? Okay, I'll stop sharing them.
What A-level requirements are needed?
So I don't know if Hannah could put that in the chat at all, but we can get, if you look on the website, whoever it is, in the Q&A, it has full details of all the grade requirements there. And also, for example, if it's an international baccalaureate, for example, as well.
If I didn't get the requirement grade for nutrition, can I still get an offer?
We would have to discuss that with the admissions team. Depends. I think it depends on how far out you are, and it depends on our process and procedure at the minute. I'll have to double check that one.
Is it a hard course to get in as an IB student? What are the chances within reaching the required grade?
So as long as you have the required grades, the most important thing is the science background. Like, biology is critical, right? Biology is essential, right? Um, you know, other than that, if you've got, as long as you meet the biology, I'd say, and you've got like that strong passion and interest, and should be fine. Should be fine. And thanks so much. I can see it so in the chat that's been posted. Thanks very much, Hannah. Appreciated. So what I can see now says, what did you mean by optional modules? So what that is, Sal, essentially, so the course, as I say, was developed to be accredited with the Association of Nutrition. So what that means is it means that we have core modules that we can't change. You have to do those modules, right? But then in year 2 and in year 3, you get one optional module, right? And that doesn't relate to Association of Nutrition accreditation. Does that make sense? So, and there's a whole range of different things that you can do that I mentioned.
Someone said, so what if they have a diploma in nutrition and dietetics?
I don't actually understand. No offense, Lynette. I mean, if you had a full, I don't know which country you're coming from. So if you have a full diploma degree, then you're looking for an MSc program rather than BSc. But it depends on what course it was, and because we need, the reason I say that is if it's that there are lots of interesting and sometimes odd diplomas from different colleges, right? So diploma in Kenya, it'd have to be screened and checked. If you have, we have the basic requirements for science. Okay, if you have that to do the diploma in the first place, and I don't know how long your diploma was or whatever. If you've got the core basics in science in particular, then it should be fine. But with not much information, I can't really say too much or assess that. And the admissions team will be able to help you with that with assessing.
Someone asked, could the energy expenditure be affected by eating disorders such as anorexia?
Definitely, 100%. Is that a question? Is it? That's a really
Yeah,
interesting question.
question.
That's a really interesting question. Yeah, definitely. I mean, we don't have time to go into that, but it can be affected in many different ways, and it's very interesting. And if you come to nutrition and medical science degree, maybe that could be your dissertation project. Before we finish, Zoe, got a few minutes. Go for it. Tell them. You can tell people what you did and what you're going to do.
Done a lot with Dr. Adrian Slee. So long story short, I've done a summer placement with Dr. Adrian Slee in sarcopenia. So how
Yeah.
exactly does sarcopenia affect women in pre and post menopause, and we did a lot of BIA, hand grip strength, skin fold thickness,
Yeah. So
and
actually recruiting participants for your
yeah,
master's students. So great internship experience. Actually real world stuff. And yeah,
and for my dissertation, I'm working on how exactly in motor neuron disease, so
yeah.
how dietitian contribute in terms of motor neuron disease patient? Are we helping them? Is the referral time timely?
Mm.
Are the referral pathway adjust to NICE guideline, SPEN guideline? What can we improve on? And yeah, it's really interesting, and I get experience in using how using Epic, so it's an NHS medical record, and how the
Well, it's all novel
multidisciplinary
data. That's
team,
the thing.
yeah,
Novel
exactly, and
patient. It's interesting.
how dietitian and the consultant and everyone in the multidisciplinary team communicate. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think there is, yeah,
We should probably start to wrap up, shouldn't we, really, now? So, Lynette, if that's a 4 year, if you've already done a 3 year course in nutrition and dietetics, you're probably looking for doing an MSc, if that's master's degree. So, but the admissions team can point you in the right direction, and it could be you do one of the master's degree and maybe see you next year. Never know. Yeah.
yeah. So we're now out of time, so we need to wrap this up here. So before we go, you go. We really appreciate your feedback on today's session. Please take a moment to complete our short survey, which will appear in your browser at the end of the event. If you'd like to meet us in person and explore our campus, don't forget to sign up for our upcoming opening day on the
Yeah.
26th
It's a good
and
one.
the 27th of June. You can find full detail and register by our website. If you have any further question following today's session, I'll be available on UniBuddy. I think Hannah attached the links in the chat, and I'll be very happy to help. Thank you all for your engagement,
Right.
comments, and questions today. And a special thank you to Dr. Adrian Slee for delivering such an excellent session. Have a great evening, everyone.
Cheers. All the best, everyone. Thank you. Bye bye.